we are not going to exhaustively explore this matter because, for one thing, quite a number of people have done extensive explorations here, and some of them are so excellent that you really owe it to yourself to look at them. So I would include in that Chris Martenson has done an exploration. Matthew 1T Crawford has done one. Phil Harper has done one, and we will touch on one of the points that he makes in a couple of minutes here. And Alexandros Marinos has also done a couple of analyses, as well as a thread in which he compiles some of the analyses that other people have done.
And IVM Meta, you can show my screen here if you like, which is a relatively long-standing with regard to COVID site, has an ongoing exhaustive description of what the various studies show, don't show, what their weaknesses are, et cetera. And Zach, if you just put my screen back on for a moment here, this with regard to specifically the Together study, they just have a number, it's an ongoing list, many of which are points that have been made by, for instance, Alexandros and Matthew and Chris and such. But just to look at a couple of them, there are many basic inconsistencies and protocol violations. There's no response to a data request. They've got two different death counts. The trial was not blind. Unequal randomization, confounding by time, and then I skipped the second one here, which is delayed by 6 months. And I'm going to let you basically talk about this for the most part, the whole thing. But I did want to say that here on IVM Meta, they say the paper was delayed over 6 months with no explanation. So this is this big study. The results were revealed back in August of 2021, and then I think it was the fluvoxamine arm, which was published within a couple weeks, and then nothing. And so there are a lot of people who, upon hearing the results, which basically were ivermectin is useless, don't bother. We were right all along. Not that that's what the authors here said, but that was the sort of the take in the media. Everyone who cared about this result immediately said, well, I'm going to need to look at the analysis. There's not even a way to look at the data because the data still aren't being produced, but the thing wasn't published for 6 months. And so IVM Meta says one possible reason would be rejection from a series of journals, which would be expected given the issues. It's a possibility. We have no idea if that's true. That was not my guess as to why it would have been delayed. But
I think
it is remarkable that suddenly this week everyone is talking about this as if this is news. And it was news in August, and now we can see how really unnews it is because the study is so flawed.
It's not even unnews; it's anti-news.
Yeah.
And Phil Harper addresses this very directly, and so I want to highlight his analysis.
Do you have something to show?
Yeah, he's got it. Well, I actually don't have something to show, but I would advise people to sign up for his Substack. He has a 7-day free trial. You can look at the whole thing. But in any case, he talks about.
So you can just. I've just pulled it up.
You just pulled it up. Yeah.
So this is.
Yeah. So yeah, he says the can't add together trial. I would say they can't even keep it together trial. So what IV Meta raises as the possibility for why this is so delayed, that it was rejected from multiple places before the New England Journal of Medicine finally accepted it. The reason that doesn't quite add up and strikes me as more generous than it needs to be is that were all of the errors here to have been spotted by reviewer after reviewer and journals to have passed on this, that would have forced them to be corrected in a sense. Some of them are so basic, the errors are just simple arithmetic errors, right? That if these things were being caught, then it's hard to imagine how it could have landed in such a high-profile journal in such a crazy state. I mean, it's really just riddled with errors. So that does suggest that, like so much in this landscape of early treatment, COVID, public health policy and all, that the distortions here are about something. It's the immense gravitational force of some object we cannot see, right? Is that object simply pharma profits? We don't know. But what we know is that nothing works in this landscape like it's supposed to. And one of the things that doesn't work is not only was this delayed, it's not really even delayed. The point is the punchline was given to us, and then the basis for that punchline was delayed by more than 6 months. So this thing was a weapon in the hands of those who argued that there was no utility to this particular early treatment. This was a weapon over that entire period without our ability to discover how good a weapon it was or how accurate it was. Mm-hmm. And then upon its release, the point is, okay, suddenly there's all this fanfare, and the Wall Street Journal is publishing on the fact that this study finally, remember, you were told randomized controlled trials are the gold standard of science. That's what you were told, mm-hmm. right? Well, here is what you are now told is the largest randomized controlled trial that's been done on this topic. Well, technically, but it wasn't done well.
I mean, this is the kind of explicit and intentional, it seems, category error that we've been talking about across the board, right? Like, vaccines have been effective in reducing rates and deaths from rabies. Cool. Therefore, anything that we call a vaccine for a particular disease is something that you need. Wait, Right. So even if it were true that randomized controlled trials were the thing that you absolutely need to demonstrate efficacy, which is not true, right? But that doesn't mean that anything that calls itself a randomized controlled trial is done well, or is done well at all. And to your point about the Wall Street Journal, every mainstream outlet is very happy about this result. That ought to be giving us pause. Why are people so pleased that early treatment with a drug that has a long safety record is not effective against what we are being told is the worst scourge to hit humankind in 100 years? That seems surprising. But then we even have this headline just struck me as particularly remarkable. So show my screen if you would. Again, Zach, this is from Newsweek. What Joe Rogan has said defending ivermectin as drug is ruled ineffective. Ruled.
Yeah. Now,
this is a headline author, and headlines are often crazy, and presumably it has nothing to do with the person who wrote this, and you can get rid of that because it's now, of course, here it's it's showing Trump, right, who has nothing to do at all with ivermectin. In fact, he's pro-vaccine, right? What the headline writer reveals, though, and no one who saw this at Newsweek before putting this up caught, is that they think this is it's like a court of law. It's like a standard of proof, like you would find in a court of law, ruled ineffective. That's not how science works. Science doesn't work by democracy, by vote. That's not what should be going on here. And yet that is clearly what we are seeing as this thing finally gets published, and suddenly everyone who was so thrilled to be talking about horse dewormer last summer is back talking about all the same things they've been talking about before without actually paying any attention to the fact that the study itself is flawed, I don't even know how many, at least 20 different ways.
Yeah. And presumably there are many out there who didn't know what to think, right? Who probably did accept randomized controlled trials are the gold standard of science. Nobody having thought through how many things were never exposed to a randomized controlled trial that we know work. Yeah. How many things are incapable of being exposed to a randomized controlled trial that we do science in other ways. Mm-hmm. But lots of people probably accepted, randomized controlled trial is certainly the best kind of science. And so, this is the largest randomized controlled trial done on this topic. Well, what did it say about ivermectin? It says it doesn't work, right? The problem is a couple things. One, randomized and controlled, right? Randomly assigning people to two groups, one of which is a placebo group, which controls for effects that are not part of the treatment, right? This, among the errors here, are errors that suggest that this was neither randomized nor placebo controlled. So here's the question. If randomized controlled trial is the gold standard, this was not a randomized controlled trial, and yet, according to the Wall Street Journal, it's the largest randomized controlled trial that's been done on this topic. So the point is, nothing in this even superficially passes muster. And what's more, if you think about what was, one of the few good things about the way the pandemic unfolded was that at the very beginning of the pandemic, science was being done out in the open. Was peer review happening? Well, review by peers was certainly happening. It was happening on this podcast and elsewhere as people were looking at science that was emerging that hadn't yet gone through the official process of peer review.
It was amazing. We talked about it. It felt like the Wild West. The preprint servers were just full. They were just, hundreds more papers weekly, and it was extraordinary.
It was the actual studies. And were the actual studies all good? No, but you could look at them and you could say, well, here's what's wrong with this one here, and oh, this one actually looks pretty good because they accounted for the thing that would trip up, another methodology. So actual review by peers happened in this case early on. The later we have gotten, the more this has been inverted. And I just want to point out how perfectly the inversion worked here. The inversion worked so that what we got here was not the ability to scrutinize anything. In fact, we were denied the ability to scrutinize anything for more than 6 months. What we got was a conclusion that matched somebody's desire, right? And then the point was, well, what are the chances that that's what the study actually says and that it does so on the basis of sound science and sound philosophy of science? Right? Many of us thought the chances were low, but there was no ability to do exactly what we're supposed to do, which is go in there and look and say, well, how good was your methodology? Your methodology could be good. Maybe you didn't follow it. How good was your methodology and did you follow it? Yep. And in this case, what we see is, it's garbage. Long after the 6-month period in which people portrayed this trial as definitive, and long after the Wall Street Journal and others touted this as, well, the evidence is finally in, right? Now, what are the chances that all of the people who got suckered a few days ago and saw the Wall Street Journal touting this are going to find Phil Harper or Alexandros Marinos or Chris Martenson or any of these people, right? The point is, this is a way to sell a conclusion as science-based when the science itself is not robust.
That's exactly right. I was struck by actually one of the finds that Alexandros made with regard to the dosing. Right. So the protocol says that the dosing given in the ivermectin arm was, 400 micrograms per kilogram of body weight for 3 days. But he went digging into the supplement, the protocol supplement, again, not the entire data set, but the protocol supplement. And the detail that he finds there is that actually that's not true. That's only true up to body weights of 90 kilograms. And then it tops out. And there's no justification for that either given or anywhere else in the ivermectin literature, right? And what that means is that for people who are, frankly, pretty much, most people above 90 kilograms are probably overweight. Not all. Some people are tall. But in general, the greater chances you have of being overweight, the greater chances you have of having been underdosed in this trial with regard to ivermectin. And there's nothing except hidden in the supplement by someone who was really trying to figure out what happened to indicate that at all. And so, this is just one example, and there are lots of these examples, but there's just so many ways that the study did not do what it claimed to do. And then you have places like Newsweek saying, well, basically the jury came back.
Yep.
And it's like, that's not what we're doing here. Oh, wait, actually, apparently it is. Because the jury came back means Newsweek and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and HuffPo, and I'm just making places up because I assume everyone has written their ridiculous piece, accepted the conclusion from the authors or from, New England Journal of Medicine's press release, and hasn't taken the time and probably doesn't have the chops or the wherewithal to actually go in and check, or even to look at, any of these analyses that have been done by the people you've mentioned.
I would also point out that this is not just a matter of lay people not having the chops to go in, right? It shouldn't be the case, but scientists all too frequently look at the title and maybe the abstract of something and assume that the work is done well. And it is amazing how frequently one goes into a paper and one sees that actually even the abstract isn't justified by the method section, for example.
Oh, very often.
It's really common.
And, methods are tough if you're outside of your particular field, and they're hard to read, but they are necessary if you're actually going to decide that what it is that the authors have claimed is true.
I would also point out the one thing I will say, by way of steel manning this trial, which I really don't feel like deserves it because the number of things that
everyone else is steel manning it for us.
Yeah, but even so, just the number of things that are wrong in the same direction does not suggest good faith. How that happened, I don't know, but it's conspicuous. And so, my feeling is steel manning only makes sense when the thing on the other side is a different perspective and you want to give it its due, but it doesn't really have a due if it's cheating.
Fair enough.
But what was I going to say? I was going to say, it is let us admit that, or just acknowledge that a study like this is hugely complex. Right.
Yes.
And it's not only complex at the level of, well, what would the study have to do and what things would have to be compared in order to accomplish the goal. And, lots of things that viewers of this podcast will be well familiar with, like, you can sabotage a trial or you can screw it up by treating too late. Right. Things like that. Or you could, in the case of ivermectin, you could give it without food so that it wouldn't cross the gut.
As they did. Right. But the point is there's lots of complexity. Or they recommended that it be taken on an empty stomach.
Right. What are the chances that you would do a study of this complexity without making some errors? I'd say they're effectively zero.
Yeah, there will be some errors. Now, it's been a lot of months since the result came out. So, I think one of the things was like I don't remember even what the numbers were, but it's like, was it 228 or 288? I don't even remember where in there, but it's like, well, typos happen, mistakes happen in the relating of results. If they happened in the original data, that's a big problem. But also, there's been a lot of time for a lot of people on a study this big with this many authors to really go through and check and check and check.
Yeah, and there's also a right way to deal with it. Either your study is so compromised by the errors that you don't publish it because it's not evidence, or it's compromised in a way that, let's say, you lose some fraction of the individuals who were in the study because they discovered they were in the placebo group, for example. And so it's that part of the study is no longer placebo controlled, but some other group wasn't aware, right? So then the point is, then you scale back what study you publish so that the study you publish is actually evidence of something, right? And the point is, okay, they made errors. Yeah. Some of the errors may just be the normal fact of a complex study, but the point is there's a right honorable way to deal with the errors that you make in a study such as that. And that didn't happen here. It didn't happen at the editor level. It didn't happen at the level of the peer reviewers. It didn't happen at the level of how this evidence emerged into public. It's one thing to see a preprint where you get to see the conclusion of the study and you get to see how the study was done and you can compare them. It's another thing to get to see the conclusion and not be able to see how the study was done. There's no preprint. And then the point is this is PR, right? This was effectively a psyop, as so much in this neighborhood has been. And so anyway, final thing I want to say is science is supposed to work, right? And I don't mean science, the philosophy of science, scientific method, but science, the practice of science in modernity, is supposed to work on the basis that we want things explored. We, society, want things explored. We provide incentives that come to those in a position to do the work in the form of jobs, in the form of promotions, in the form of grants, in the form of prizes, right? All of these things are given for high quality work that elucidates stuff in a way that is good. And those incentives draw people to discover things, right? But if those incentives are not targeted at, hey, discover what the truth of ivermectin is, but they're targeted at, here's a story that we need to be supported by science-looking stuff. They can do that too. If you give the prizes and the jobs and the promotions and the grants to people who come up with a story that some very powerful entity wants told, then that's what science will do. And in this particular case, we do know that, the apparatus surrounding Anthony Fauci is the behemoth of grant awarding, right? That thing is in a position to control a huge fraction of the money, which serves the purpose of the incentive in the system. So what that has to do with how this trial came about, we don't know. But the fact that you would get a trial that claims to be essentially definitive by claiming the mantle of what they have called the gold standard, which I will argue is actually about something else. But we've been told randomized controlled trial is the gold standard, right? This trial claims to be the largest randomized controlled trial of this particular treatment, and it comes to a conclusion that is, well, treatment doesn't work, right? That is how you tell a story. And the fact that it wasn't a randomized controlled trial, right, that it pretends to be one but isn't one, is part and parcel of what's going on here. So my claim is going to be that this idea that randomized controlled trial is the gold standard is actually a trope of sorts. There is a way in which it can be true. If a randomized controlled trial is done well, right? If the philosophy of science underneath it is sound, if the methodology is good, and if the methodology is followed well, then it is going to be the best way to elucidate, especially a subtle pattern, right? However, I don't think that's why it is being shoved at us as the gold standard. It's being shoved at us because it is the most gameable, right? Because just as a good methodology is amplified by randomized controlled trial, a bad methodology is too. And
well, it's gameable, but I would say another point in its favor, in scare quotes, is that it can't be done by individuals without large backing.
Oh, right.
So you can't come in and try to understand the study in retrospect the way that Alexandros and Matthew and Phil and Chris and that we have in a lot of other places, and that is as it should be. But in order to we have ourselves done not in this sphere, but a lot of very low tech, low cost science. And in fact, I used to encourage this, not just for myself, but for my students. Like you don't want something that's going to require a lot of money, because then you're not nimble. Then you can't move at the point that your funders say, actually, I don't like what you're doing anymore. Right? And that's not to say that there aren't questions that deserve to be asked and that are important for humanity that they be asked and answered that require a lot of money. There are. But there are also there's too many incentives to push money towards being more expensive than it needs to be. Did I say money? That pushes science towards being more expensive than it needs to be. Because that renders those people doing the science incapable of getting out. So RCTs, randomized controlled trials, we can't do those.
Right.
Individuals can't do those.
Right. Individuals can't do that. You're right. That's from the point of view of something that wishes to control the narrative, that is a major feature, right? That somebody can't easily bootstrap one. So they're highly gameable methodologically, and individuals can't do them because they're too expensive. I think these are both driving forces here. I guess the last thing I would say is there is a conspicuous oddness to the Together trial, which I haven't heard discussed in this last phase, which is that it oddly, given what it did here with ivermectin, concluded that fluvoxamine was highly effective, right? Now, my point would be... And
that result was then published within a couple of weeks, back in August.
Yeah, immediately. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So here's the question. That did not, as far as I'm aware, radically change the standard of care so that people who had COVID were getting fluvoxamine. Why didn't it? If the idea is, well, we'd give them ivermectin if a randomized controlled trial said it worked. Okay, it did with fluvoxamine. What happened to that? Right? So anyway, I'd be interested to hear what the answer is on that front, but I think the point is all of this looks like the little people, the riffraff, and by the riffraff I mean us, mm-hmm. right, need to be placated or dismissed in some way. And there's going to be enough science-looking stuff to make that happen. And the most annoying thing is that when we try to hold them to any standard whatsoever, it's obvious that they're not adhering to one.
Right. Well, there are a whole lot of people wearing science-ish hats.
Science-ish hats, yeah, exactly.